But for most, it is a mild one. Temperatures may be a shade cooler than they have been today. On to Monday, further rain is in the forecast for much of the UK. Maybe something a little bit drier and brighter coming through for parts of eastern England. And here, actually, winds may well be a little bit lighter. Further west, it's going to be another blustery day. Good news is, Tuesday and Wednesday, it does turn a little bit dry for some of us, but feeling a little bit colder.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, lovely people. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on the radio box. Tonight on the programme, I'll be joined by Andrew Lowenthal to discuss big tech censorship. I'll be asking if free speech, privacy, human autonomy, if any or all of it is now under assault. I'll also be speaking to philosopher Peter Boghossian about more of the same, about that ongoing assault on our freedom to express ourselves and ask questions. And finally, we'll hear about iconic comedy Trading Places, which celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. And we'll look at new research which asks, seriously, if people think they could trade places with a stockbroker. I know I couldn't, I can't add up. All of that and plenty of chat with my lovely panellist, journalist, author and presenter, Jasmine Birtles. But first, an update on the latest news from Tatiana Sanchez.
Neil, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Pro-Palestinian protesters are staging a day of national action with demonstrations and marches having taken place across the country. People have been gathered outside of Downing Street this evening. Police say around 250 demonstrators have been gathering outside the gates on Whitehall. At least 2 protesters were carried away by police at Waterloo Station. After more pro-Palestine demonstrations, people could be heard chanting "Ceasefire now" and "From the river to the sea" in the middle of the station's concourse. These scenes were captured in North London this afternoon. As you can see, some protesters were heard and seen describing Israel as a terror state. GB News reporter Jeff Moody was at a protest in Bristol.
Well, they're calling this a national day of action, and there's certainly plenty of action here in Bristol. We think there's something around 5,000 people that have taken to the streets today in Bristol. They're taken to the streets not just here, but in 100 different cities and towns across our country. And the aim of today is for, as the organisers say, for ordinary people to voice their opinion and to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So far, it's been a peaceful protest, plenty of banners, plenty of anger, plenty of debate on the streets, but so far the police have been policing this with a light touch, and that does seem to have paid off.
And at least 4 people were arrested during a Just Stop Oil protest earlier today. Activists marched from the Shell headquarters in opposition to the approval of more than 100 new oil and gas projects. The group says peaceful protesters are being locked up, while those who it described as climate criminals are protected. 2 people have been airlifted to hospital after a dog attack in the north of Wales. Officers were called to an address in the Rhondda Cynon area yesterday morning. 1 dog has been destroyed, another 37 dogs and cats were seized by authorities. More on this story as we get it. The Israeli military is warning thousands of people to leave the south of Gaza as it tightens its focus on Hamas terrorists there. Earlier, warnings saw scores of people move from the north of Gaza amid the escalating conflict. Leaflets have been dropped by the IDF near the Khan Yunis area, telling people to move again, this time westward. Meanwhile, Israel says it will allow 2 truckloads of fuel into Gaza each day following international pressure. It's after the UN warned of rapidly deteriorating conditions and a mounting risk of starvation. The White House wants larger quantities of fuel to be delivered on a regular basis. Major advertisers are pulling their business from X, formerly known as Twitter, amid a row over alleged anti-Semitism. It comes after the site's owner, Elon Musk, appeared to endorse a post that falsely claimed members of the Jewish community were stoking hatred against white people. The White House called it an abhorrent promotion of anti-Semitic and racist hate. Disney, Warner Brothers and US network NBC are among those who've paused their advertising. The Chancellor says there's a pathway to lower taxes ahead of next week's autumn statement, arguing the economy has turned a corner. Jeremy Hunt says this is the moment to focus on growth after inflation halved over the past year. Now, it's understood he's considering cutting rates on inheritance and business taxes in what could be one of the last fiscal announcements before the next election.
OBR numbers and forecasts will be published on Wednesday at the autumn statement. But there is no easy route to reducing the tax burden. The way we do it is by spending taxpayers' money more wisely, and that means having more productive public services.
And the creator of Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run films says enough clay for just one more film after its supplier ceased operations. When New Clay Products announced the closure of its facility near Torquay earlier this year, Aardman Animations quickly brought all of its remaining stock. According to The Telegraph, the studio has just enough to complete its new Wallace and Gromit feature, due for release next year. New Clay produced a particular kind of plasticine, which is perfect for animating. Stop-motion artists say using any wrong kind would be like wearing the wrong trousers. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Are you tired of all that's happening? Do you feel just about done with the whole lot of it? If it's any comfort, I know I do. Whatever we're being sold now, forever war, fear of pandemic, net zero and all that lunacy demands, I don't want it. I don't want any of it. And so I ask again a question I will keep asking. Who are we? What is our species all about? What is our so-called Western civilization supposed to be? It seems to me the only point of our civilization now is money, the creation and pursuit of money, and that the best way to make money is to make war. To make war and care not a jot which side wins. Indeed, to care not a jot whether any side wins, as long as the consequence of every war is another war. We were told long ago that the love of money is the root of all evil, also that whoever saves one life saves the world entire. The budget for the US Pentagon is predicted sometime very soon to reach $1 trillion a year. The US economy, still the biggest in the world, depends on war, depends upon the sale of weapons of war. That means the US government depends on war too, war somewhere or everywhere, just to balance the books, or at least to sell the fantasy that those books could ever balance. It's demonstrably the case that US arms manufacturers sell their wares to anyone able to pay, regardless of how they're to be used, regardless of whether civilians are the targets. A 2022 report for the Quincy Institute revealed that of the 46 active wars in the world that year, 34 involved one or more parties armed by the United States. Sometimes the US arms companies were arming both sides. The Saudi United Arab Emirates-led intervention in Yemen between 2015 and now has killed 400,000 and counting. The war in Ukraine has earned hundreds of billions for weapons manufacturers and killed 500,000 more. Overlooked and sidelined by more recent events, that war is still going on, still making money. But war in the Ukraine is yesterday's news compared to the latest war in the Middle East. Are we happy with this kind of thing? As the 21st century grinds forwards, is this and more of this all we must look forward to? Or does something have to give? For all the empty talk of progress, inclusivity, tolerance, diversity and the rest, are we happy that war and endless death are the prerequisites for economic growth? The bewildering fog of information out there, narratives ruthlessly and relentlessly pushed by governments invested of economic necessity in forever war is, I suppose, making it increasingly tempting, born of disillusionment and exhaustion, simply to pick a side and cheer on the destruction of the other. It's certainly simpler that way, undemanding of conscience. I say it's at least true to say that talking about peace, far less advocating peace, is the most controversial stance to adopt. I was raised and educated to believe genocide is wrong, antithetical to what it means to be human and alive, and that saying as much out loud ought not to be controversial. Decades ago, we were sold a war on terror. Another question we might ask in that regard is, how do you make fewer terrorists, the agents of terror, instead of more terrorists? Both sides in the war between Israel and Hamas have one thing in common, belief that each must keep killing the other until the other is gone. Is that where we are now? Pick a side and kill the other until the other is wiped from the earth? That doesn't seem progressive to me. As well as the line about the love of money being the root of all evil, we were told long ago that the first casualty of war is truth. We don't seem to be remembering that either. Perhaps the other war we ought to be paying attention to is the information war, the war to determine who controls the creation and delivery of information. If exhaustion, spiritual as well as physical, tempts you simply to pick a side, to see every issue as black or white with no grey in between, then might the same fatigue blind us to how much and how often we are lied to? We know we were lied to about the pandemic, the justifications for the official response, lockdown and all but mandated jabs. We know we were lied to about the war in Ukraine. We were told it was nothing to do with NATO expansion. But now the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, admits it was all about the expansion of NATO. Mark Twain wrote that, quote, "It's not what you don't know that kills you, it's what you know for sure that isn't so." The ultimate danger in the information war is believing lies, believing them for sure. But what do you do if the other side wins the information war and all you are offered are their lies? Forever war is a forever distraction from everything else that's going on, everything else that's being pulled on us. Out there in the fog, overlooked and sidelined by the mainstream, but still, for the meantime at least, resolutely scrutinised by online media, is the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty and the proposed amendments thereof. I say the substance of the changes proposed for that treaty by and for the WHO that is largely funded by and therefore mostly due to the bidding of one Bill Gates, should terrify us. Tedros Ghebreyesus, Director General of the WHO, recently said fears raised online about the treaty and its implications for the sovereignty of nation states are fake news, misinformation and conspiracy theory. He says claims that national sovereignty is under threat, that the WHO will have power to impose lockdowns and mandates and the rest are unfounded. I say those are lies. Unelected, unaccountable Ghebreyesus asks the governments of all 190-odd countries contemplating the treaty amendments that will be adopted across the board unless governments actively opt out, and there's precious little sign of that, must instead take action to counter these false narratives. In every way that matters, the countering of so-called false narratives means stopping your freedom of speech. Ghebreyesus says all that, despite the draft of the new document released earlier this year, which makes plain the WHO wants to remove from the treaty the concept of non-binding, making the treaty binding for all, and to have nation-states accept it will be up to the WHO to decide when anything poses a threat to world health and to act accordingly. The draft describes the threat posed by an infodemic, there's a new word to chill the blood, and refers to the overabundance of information, accurate or not. Read that again, accurate or not, implying that the WHO would expect governments to root out and remove even that information which is true if its presence in the public domain might lead individuals to behaving in ways the WHO does not like for whatever reason. In this objective, the WHO has the support of tech giants like Google, standing ready with what they describe as inoculations against wrongthink. Even if what you read or hear is true, even if what you say to others is true, if it results or may result in you or anyone else behaving in a way the WHO does not like, then that truth would have to be stifled. The WHO desires and is working towards having, in the event of what they and they alone declare as a health emergency, even the potential to become a health emergency, control of where food is grown, where clothes are made, all of it in the name of pandemic prevention, avoidance of climate change. Anything might be declared a pandemic risk, empowering the WHO to redistribute resources. Edits made to documents in the spring of this year would empower the WHO to instruct nation states to lock down their populations, to increase surveillance of those populations, to determine treatments, to mandate jabs, to cede to the WHO the control of the distribution of such products, to order companies to surrender to the WHO intellectual property and profits, to accept WHO demands about the redistribution of anything and everything. Let's remember, above all, that the WHO were disastrous in the face of the last pandemic. Who in their right mind would even contemplate giving them more influence next time around? Covering all that this week, online media channel Redacted reminded us of the words of US President Herbert Hoover, warning that, quote, every collectivist revolution rides in on the Trojan horse of emergency. It was the tactic of Lenin, Hitler and Mussolini. In the collectivist sweep over a dozen minor countries of Europe, it was the cry of men striving to get on horseback, and emergency became the justification of the subsequent steps. This technique of creating emergency is the greatest achievement that demagoguery attains. Next month, the UK's King Charles heads to Dubai and COP28. We don't know what he'll say there, but he's an outspoken supporter of centralised power and believes in net zero. If, as constitutional monarch, he approves any surrender of national sovereignty, sovereignty which, under the terms of his coronation oath, he has sworn to defend, then he makes himself redundant in every meaningful way. It's precisely in this time of exhaustion and of disillusionment that we must defend our right to information, the right to determine for ourselves what information we trust. When did words like misinformation, disinformation and malinformation become part of how we are lectured to by those claiming power over our lives? By their avoidance of debate, by their desertion of the debating chamber that's the House of Commons, our elected representatives have abdicated their sworn responsibility to speak freely on our behalf and to listen respectfully to the free speech of others. We are in dreadful danger now, not just of the consequences of wars waged in our name, but of the loss even of our right to talk about such things. I see we are lied to about one thing after another, from the justification for war to the reality of our economy, from the suicide note that is commitment to net zero, to the threat posed to our right to spend our own money without the permission of the state. Instead of the free trade of ideas and truth, all we are promised is ever more censorship. In The Great Taking, David Rogers Webb wrote, "There are monsters under the stairs, eating people alive, but you don't want to look under the stairs because you want to keep using the stairs." Here's the thing, are we so beaten down that we will meekly accept more lies rather than ask questions? If we don't demand truthful answers, then I ask again, who are we? I'm joined throughout the show today by journalist and author Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, thanks for being here.
Hi.
I find all of this soul-sapping, to be honest. What do you feel about the progression of events?
Well, do you know, I'm on the other way because I think I've only just got started, frankly. Back in 2020, I said to a friend of mine that I felt that it was going to take 5 years for this, what I described as mass hypnosis, to break. So that was 2020. We're towards the end of 23 now. We've got at least, by my reckoning, we've got at least a year to go. So I'm fighting I've been fighting from the start. I'm just starting to fight all this. But I totally agree with you that we individually have to keep fighting, and every individual who does makes a difference. And this is something I think that we all need to be aware of. It's not out there. We can't wait for the government to do anything. I think, as we've had shown to us in living colour over the last few years, government's not going to do it. It is going to be us as individuals in whatever way we can, however small we might think it is. We are the ones that are going to break through this.
It troubles me that there's constant distraction. I mean, it's easy, and in many ways it's only right that people are distracted by war in all its horror, in all its manifestations. But at the same time, things are happening out of sight, sidelined, which are undoubtedly restricting our freedoms in every conceivable way.
Yes, and like you, I've noticed this as well. I actually wrote a piece for my Substack, News Uncut, just recently saying exactly that. But I've heard from a few people, including Israelis, that they could not believe, absolutely, that the attack from Hamas was not known by their leaders, and particularly Netanyahu. And, you know, that the whole distraction has been very, very useful for Netanyahu, of course, who was facing all sorts of things, legal problems, all kinds. But as you've pointed out, we have this worry, big worry, of the World Health Organization wanting to restrict our movement, you know, if there's some sort of international outbreak of restless leg syndrome or whatever. Any excuse, you know, they will do it, and we have to fight this.
And the terrifying abdication of responsibility by elected representatives. You know, when Andrew Bridgen tried to have a debate, or did have a debate about excess deaths, no one came.
No.
And likewise, you know, the WHO amendments to the treaty will happen by default unless individual governments, for whatever reason, say, no, we don't want to take part in that, we don't want to sign up to it. And there's no sign of that happening.
There isn't, no. And I have said, again, I'm pushing it, and I would say to anybody who is concerned, and I think there are more and more people who are working it out, a bit like with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, you know, there are more and more people who are hearing about it and going, whoa. Same with the WHO, and I think it is up to us as individuals to talk about it, to tell our friends, tell our social media followers, all of that, and keep pushing, because, again, it might seem like there is only a few of us, but you only need 20% to change things. It's just 20% of people are needed to change everything.
What's the antidote to the exhaustion? Because after all, people have been under the cosh one way or another for years now. How do we embolden and re-energise ourselves?
Well, I always find that the antidote to tiredness and, as you say, exhaustion is joy, interestingly. And that sounds like a funny thing to say, but I really do mean it. And joy is something that we have inside us. It doesn't have to be something that comes from outside. I mean, it's the biblical quote, your joy no man taketh from you. So it is, we genuinely can insist on joy, of our own joy, and we can insist that whatever's happening around us or seems to be happening around us cannot and will not take our joy.
In search of joy, how encouraging. Now we're on a break, after which commentator Andrew Lowenthal will be here to tackle the subject of big tech censorship, and we'll discuss if we're now in an age where free speech, privacy and human autonomy are under assault. Don't go away.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, are we able to speak freely? It's a question I keep asking. In the emerging digital world, are there or are there not growing constraints on traditional freedoms to say whatever, well, we damn well please? Joining me now is writer Andrew Lowenthal, director of Libernet, dedicated to asking questions about free speech, privacy and human autonomy. Thank you so much for joining me, Andrew.
Very nice to be here, Neil.
Is there ever justification for controlling information and indeed access to information?
I think where you're promoting illegal activity, where you're promoting terror, where you're promoting violence, I think, free speech has always been just on the cusp of that. So I would agree that there is a role, but what we've seen here is an absolutely enormous overreach and the use of kind of hate misinformation laws and policies essentially to justify clamping down on very, very legitimate speech. So it's always been a slippery slope, and the problem has become that the people who used to be the kind of core defenders of free expression, which, well, for the last kind of several decades have been much more on the left, have turned out, essentially cave over the last several years with increasing rapidity.
Do you think, I mean, I always try and question whether or not I'm just paranoid, but do you think we have anything to fear from the centralising of power and control of information under organisations like the WEF or the WHO or so on?
Yeah, you are paranoid, but it doesn't mean they're not after you. So I think unfortunately, we have to kind of update the way in which we understand, essentially how public opinion is being managed today. I think for a lot of people, we're still in this kind of Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction type model of how we think the government tries to influence us. And I think the internet and social media have essentially enabled this much more sophisticated way in which public opinion is managed through shadow banning, through taking people offline, from smearing and new forms of censorship that people don't quite see as clearly. It's not such a kind of heavy hammer as essentially the old system was, but it's very much there. And we need to essentially have a much better understanding of what's going on. I think that is increasing in terms of the general population's understanding of what that new model looks like through things like the Twitter files, through various other investigations that are coming out, Missouri versus Biden in the US, these various investigations. But it's going to take some time for people to see what this new model is and what it looks like, and then how you protect yourself against it. In the interim, a healthy dose of skepticism and a little bit of paranoia probably aren't too bad. Just don't go too far.
Bear with me while I address my paranoia to Jasmine Birtles, who's my guest in the studio. Jasmine, I would imagine big tech would say that they have a responsibility because they're in control of something very powerful, that they have a responsibility to mediate, supervise, and where necessary, take information down. But is it a centralising of power against the will of the people?
Well, it does seem to be. And I go back to what you mentioned in your opening monologue, the Trojan horse of emergency. And you do find quite regularly that some emergency will happen, and the people or a group of the people will suddenly demand that a certain section of information is shut down because of those people who are doing terrible things. Look at what they're doing over there. So quite often you find that the centralised power has their work done for them by people demanding it. Once they create, maybe they create an emergency, or a so-called emergency creates itself. And I think we as the people need to grow further to understand that adults need to be given the opportunity to decide for themselves. And yes, sometimes adults will make the wrong decisions, but ultimately we have to be able to decide for ourselves.
Andrew, what about that, Jasmine saying, this idea that by invoking emergency, and as I mentioned at the top of the programme, I don't know if you heard, the idea that it's a Trojan horse, which can be used to smuggle in control. What do you say to that?
Oh, I completely agree. I think we saw that very much during COVID. We had these kind of already kind of misinformation, or so-called anti or counter disinformation industry that had been growing for quite some time, and COVID essentially created this, it made the Trojan horse even bigger and allowed for huge sweeping amounts of what became very direct forms of censorship and involvement of, increasingly the security state. So one of the stories that just came out that I was also part of publishing is looking at something called the Stanford Internet Observatory. It turns out that based on new documents released from the House Weaponization, on the weaponization of the federal government in the US, that actually this thing called the Election Integrity Partnership, and the Virality Project developed the police so-called anti-vaccine disinformation were actually conceived of by the Department of Homeland Security. So there are emails now sent to where the partners are saying, we've been, I won't put it directly, but, we've been asked by DHS and CISA to set this partnership up. So there's no doubt anymore in the Twitter files of how much the security state has essentially become involved in this work. So again, that's why we need to be careful. And those people who should have been paying attention, my background is very much from this kind of progressive, liberal, online freedom of expression section of civil society that was meant to be dedicated to essentially watching, corporate power, big tech, the government, etc., and holding it to account. During the pandemic, essentially, not only did a huge swathes of that section of civil society cave, actually a lot of the NGOs and different labs and centers at universities, they actually ended up working with the government to enable some of this censorship under the cloak of disinformation.
Is that alliance, Andrew, that rather than counterbalances one against the other, it's that coming together with one objective that's not particularly clear that troubles me most of all. But Andrew, I've run out of time with you, but I hope to pick up this conversation with you again at some point in the future. Andrew Lowenthal from Libernet, thank you so much for joining us and offering your insight.
Thank you.
Another break, after which I'll be joined in the studio by philosopher Peter Boghossian to discuss this, what I see as an ongoing assault on free speech. Please stay with me.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new t-shirt. It's your new t-shirt.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. So far we've been talking about the freedom to speak, which is surely a fundamental, if not the fundamental requirement of any civilised society. Here in the studio to pick up and carry forward that conversation is philosopher Peter Boghossian. And if ever there was a time for philosophers, I would say that time is now. Thank you for joining.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Obviously, Jasmine is still with us for the ongoing conversation. Peter, I feel that there ought to be a meta-narrative, a big story that we tell ourselves about our civilization. Is there still such a thing out there?
Well, the meta-narrative it's a good point. It's very relevant. It comes from a 1979 work, The Postmodern Condition, from a philosopher, Lyotard, and the idea is an incredulity towards meta-narratives, a skepticism about meta-narratives. So what is a meta-narrative? A meta-narrative is Marxism is a meta-narrative, science, like evolution would be a meta-narrative, a way to explain kind of a grand theory. Christianity is a meta-narrative. But that's one of the things, that's the postmodern condition, is we live in a world now in which the meta-narratives have been attacked. And then the moral substructure just collapses as a consequence. So yeah, you're right. There is a kind of demeaning of truth and a demeaning of big stories that we tell ourselves to explain how we should live in the world.
I feel the want of a moral compass. Now, I don't mean that everyone should follow that moral compass, but I believe that every civilization ought to have an idea about itself, what it defines for its population as the right way forward. And people can debate that, but there ought to be a sense of what is right, and I think that is fundamentally lacking.
Okay, so you have two ways to look at it. We've made a lot of mistakes in the past. So we've made mistakes, for example, with the way that we've treated homosexuals. We've made terrible mistakes with the way we've treated minorities. We've made mistakes across the board morally. Animals, I think, we could also put in that category. And people think because we've made mistakes in the past, we're not on solid footing anymore, so we don't know how to proceed. And so once that happens, the floodgates are open. But I'll suggest some meta-narratives to you that we can pick up. One is the importance of friendship. We know that if you have friends, your life will be better. If you have strong communities, your life will be better. Socrates talks about it. Aristotle talks about it quite a bit, the importance of friendship, what it means to be a friend, how to have virtual relationships with two people who care about each other. That's a meta-narrative. Another meta-narrative I think that we've lost is the importance of freedom and the importance of liberty and the importance of human dignity. Those are all essential to the human condition. And recently, and you've spoken about this very eloquently, recently we've seen the demeaning of those meta-narratives, and then the substrate breaks down. The whole system breaks down. Men go into women's rooms, they go into women's sports. People demand that you have to put things in your bodies. So the whole system has become... The system has trembled. Now, if the system is broken or not, that's another story.
And Jasmine, I feel that because we don't have this bigger story about ourselves, that it's ever more dangerous that something out there like big tech is controlling what we talk about at all. And as I said at the top of the show, I think at the moment the only story we seem to tell ourselves is that you go out there and you make money by any means possible.
Well, true. As you're saying that, I'm thinking of Václav Havel, who, in one of the books of letters that he did, he was talking about the mega machinery that we find ourselves under when we reject God. When you reject God, you make man godlike. You end up being under what he describes as a mega machinery. And of course, he grew up under communist rule, so he knows what mega machinery is. And I do feel that this is, as you say, this grand story is something outside of just a sense of us being little material creatures, matter bodies. There's a more universal, divine concept of life that we need to hold on to, and that should inform what we have at the moment as human life. Without that, I think we are under this mega machinery that Václav Havel talks about.
And Peter, with that in mind, how much are we at risk from the way in which everything we say and think is being controlled? For want even of a big story.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something Jasmine said because I think it's really important. So it's not clear that we don't have a meta-narrative. So maybe critical social justice or wokeism was a substitution for that. It's the idea is it's a substitution hypothesis. So belief is the default. We just basically have to believe in something. And the consequence of that, when Christianity fell, we started believing in other things. We started to sacralize other principles and other ideas. And the question is, and I'm not saying I know the answer. I suspect I know it's true, but I'm not going to offer that at the moment. If the substitution hypothesis is true, then we're all kind of doomed, right? So we'll just go from one religion to another religion to another religion, one superstition to another superstition to another superstition. I think time will tell in a very short order of time if that's correct as wokeism fades.
Am I paranoid, or are we increasingly living in a shrinking pool of freedom to speak and share ideas?
No, that's certainly not paranoid, and you see that the exemplar of that is China with ESG and social credit systems that are attempting to come in. No, that's not paranoid, but it doesn't mean that it's intentional that everybody's out to get you. So I think one thing that often gets lost in this conversation is forget or just bracket for a moment the mechanisms of control. What are the consequences of the lack of the freedom to speak openly and honestly? What are the consequences of when people are forthright in their speech and there are increasing penalties for those people? And I don't mean mere cancellation. I mean, you can go back and think Maoism. What are the consequences for that? And that's something we don't often speak about outside of the economic realm.
I agree that I think there are some who are intentionally trying to close down free speech and control the narrative. But I think I agree that there seems to be, I think, a general hypnosis, and quite a lot of people who we think are in control, actually they're not. They're being, if you like, there's a sort of a general hypnosis sense that that's what's controlling them at the moment.
So then the question would be, how do we create a moral infrastructure to see what, to have an honest conversation about what we should censor? For example, in Australia, they were chanting "Gas the Jews." And I'm not talking legally. I'm talking, what should the laws be? How do we make public policies? Like, can we rationally, as a society, figure out whether or not we should allow people to yell from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, or gas, something far more explicit than that, than gas the Jews? The problem is that we're not really having open and honest conversations about any of this stuff. We're doing this to ourselves. Forget about ESG or forget about control mechanisms. We're self-censoring ourselves out of fear.
What are you asked the question yourself, what are the consequences of this kind of censorship? What's the answer? Where do we end up?
Well, I'll tell you what I think that nobody is talking about, but it's perhaps the worst consequence of all. If you want to have a relationship with somebody, if you want to have a friendship with somebody, then you have to say what you mean to me, and I have to say what I mean to you. Because if you don't say what you mean to me, then I'll only go by the words that you use. So I'll never really know who you are, and you'll never know who I am. You know, from Aristotle and Socrates onward, men who are base cannot have friendships with each other. Only virtuous people can have friendships, like genuine friendships. But you can't even aspire to the level of virtue if you can't say what you mean. Because I want to know you for who you are, not just for what you say. So the consequence of wide-scale censorship is we're losing friendships. People aren't speaking to each other. Social media is, of course, exacerbating that. So we have kind of these micro mechanisms.
There's also the disability, the inability to debate, it seems now, because, as you say, you could say something to me and I could disagree fundamentally. So I'll be saying, you know, no, I disagree with that because X, Y, Z. And then you could say, well, I disagree. So we could either keep on until we come to some sort of agreement with maybe with some of it, or we can go, right, well, I'm going to cancel you then.
What you say really registers with me. I don't want to know what you think you should say.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that. I want to hear what you actually think.
Yeah.
and I'm not necessarily going to judge you as a, as someone that I cannot go forward with in a conversation. If you don't agree with me and I don't agree with you, that's the basis for a conversation.
Right, it's also the basis for friendship.
We're going to run out of time here. Peter Boghossian, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, this is a conversation that could run, and hopefully we'll get the chance to pick it up again, but thank you so much so far. Another break is forced upon us. We're always at the mercy, after which something completely different. Stay with me.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back once more to Neil Oliver Live. Now, the comedy movie Trading Places celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. Can you imagine? Now, 4 decades on, UK workers have been asked a question related to that film. Do you think you could make it as a stock trader if you had the chance? I'm joined now by Paddy Osborne from the Academic Dean and Managing Director at the London Academy of Trading. Good evening. Thank you for joining me. Is it the case? To broaden it out a bit, can anyone be anything? Is that what we're asking?
I think it was Malcolm Gladwell said that any skill can be learnt in 10,000 hours. I'm not completely sure that's the case for absolutely everything, but I think there's a lot of evidence that things like trading can be taught. There's a certain technique, and I think Trading Places, the concept has obviously been very dramatised, but I think it's not off the scale possible.
That idea, though, within the film that, you know, you could pluck somebody from any realm, from absolute obscurity, from poverty, from any kind of situation, and put them in the right clothes, give them the right context and the right setting, and they can manifest some hitherto hidden ability. You know, is there any truth in that beyond the fanciful, that anyone and everyone has the potential in the right circumstances to be anything?
Yeah, I don't think anyone and everyone has the ability to do that, but I think obviously they assumed that this Eddie Murphy did have some skills and knowledge. I think people do have skills and knowledge, and it's a matter of learning anything. Anything you do, step one is you learn about it, how to do it. Step two is you practice. And step three is you get better and you can become more proficient.
Is there something? Is there something specific about the skills required by stock trading, the stockbroker, that we've all seen? You know, the people on the trading floor gesticulating wildly at one another. You know, is there something about that? Is it something that's pretty basic to learn if you're given the opportunity? It seems outlandish to me.
It's not basic by any means. Of course, there's a lot to learn and things. At the end of the day, the four things really that we teach and that we think that you should need to know. One is the fundamental analysis and understanding news, politics, interest rates, inflation, and what it does to markets. The second one is technical analysis and charts and understanding how things move and looking for trends and that sort of thing. The most important thing that you need to understand about yourself and about your behavior is psychology, and not falling foul to your own emotions, because that's what really, hope, fear, greed, revenge, etc., causes all sorts of trouble in trading. And the last thing is risk management, which most people in our survey actually said is the number one thing that you need to have to become a successful trader. And of course, it's quite true. You've got to manage your risk at all times.
I know it's beyond me, but Paddy Osborne from the London Academy of Trading, thank you so much for marking the 40th anniversary of Trading Places with me tonight. Jasmine, just before we come to it, we've got a clip for those for whom Trading Places is an unknown quantity. Here it is.
Happy New Year!
Winthrop, Valentine.
Hey, how'd you make out today?
How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you?
Oh, see, I made Lewis a bet here. Lewis bet me that we couldn't both get rich and put you on the poorhouse at the same time. He didn't think we could do it. I won.
I lost. $1.
Thank you, Lewis.
Jasmine, do you remember the movie, and do you buy the hypothesis that anyone could do that given the circumstances?
Well, the thing is that, what we haven't talked about is traders not being very good at it. And, when it comes to managing funds, fund managers, 85% of them underperform the stock market.
80%?
85%. So, these funds that are actually managed tend not to be that really worth bothering with. So what I tend to say to people, particularly when you start off investing, is go for an index tracking fund. Those are run by computer, and they just put a small amount of your money into every single company in a particular index, like the FTSE 100 or whatever. And it's just done by computer. They're cheap, they're easy, and they tend to do better.
Has the day of the trader, as portrayed in Trading Places, gone?
Well, as portrayed, yes, shouting and throwing things around in a trading thing, yes. People tend to be just very quietly in front of their computers going like this. So that does mean, of course, that it makes it easier for you or I to be day traders. I mean, you can do it, we can do it. But the thing is, to make any money at all, or to not lose, you really do need to spend quite a lot of time at it, time that I'm personally not willing to put into it. So that's why I tend to invest in funds, generally the trackers.
I just know it's utterly beyond me on the trading floor or with a computer or anything else. That, sadly, because of the constraints of time, is all from me this evening on Neil Oliver Live. Thanks, as always, to my guests tonight, and particularly to my brilliant panellist, Jasmine Birtles. Next up, in the fullness of time, it's the Saturday Five.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to Sunday, for most of us we will see further rain. There'll be a few brighter moments and for all it will be fairly mild. Reason for the unsettled weather is this huge area low pressure which is not going to go far as we go through the second half of the weekend. Note the tightly packed isobars down towards the south indicating it's going to be pretty blustery. So as we end Saturday, going into the early hours of Sunday, relatively clear skies across England and Wales initially. Further north we have further areas of rain and they will sink their way southeastwards as we go through the course of the night. It's a mild one for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in the positive territory, and as I mentioned, it's going to be pretty blustery down towards the southwest, risk of some gales here as we go through Sunday. Sunday really is a mixture of showers or longer spells of rain. Some of the rain could potentially be fairly heavy at times. Best of any brightness probably up across eastern Scotland. Southwestern England may well cheer up too as we go into the afternoon, but for most it is a mild one. Temperatures may be a shade cooler than they have been today. On to Monday, further rain is in the forecast for much of the UK. Maybe something a little bit drier and brighter coming through for parts of eastern England, and here actually winds may well be a little bit lighter. Further west, it's going to be another blustery day. Good news is Tuesday and Wednesday it does turn a little bit dry for some of us, but feeling a little bit colder.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist. And you survived? I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for